And welcome back to Daru Strong Podcast, episode number 47. I'm your host, Phil Daru. Today, I had the opportunity to talk to a guy who's been somewhat of a mentor of mine, a coach that I've been looking up to for a long time, Loren Landow. Now, Loren is the head strength and conditioning coach for the Denver Broncos. He also owns his own facility, Landow Performance in Colorado. So we had a great opportunity to get in touch with him finally and talk shop about not only NFL training, but also works with a large amount of UFC fighters. So we got into deep detail on how he goes about programming and coaching MMA athletes. But before we do that, we have to shout out the sponsors. Athletic CBD, go to athleticcbd.com. Use my discount code Daru at your checkout to get 20% off your final purchase. Also, if you want to know what shoe I actually wear in all of my photos, all of my videos, it is Vivo Barefoot. Now, vivobarefoot.com. Go check them out. If you want to use my discount code, it's Daru Strong, and you'll get a discount on your shoes there as well. You can rock the shoes that I wear for full functionality, and they're pretty stylish too. Also, if you're looking to learn some of the methods, the protocols, the principles of training that I use with some of my elite level fighters and athletes, go ahead, check out my mentorship program. Link is down below or in the description. Or you can go to my website, darustrong.com, to get involved, get inside the program, and get access for life with a one-time fee. All right, so now let's get on to the podcast.
Let's go. Mind over matter. Put your mind somewhere else and keep going. That little voice in your head is trying to stop you from getting to where you want to be. Be successful and keep moving forward. With your host and world-renowned strength and conditioning coach, Phil Daru.
All right, guys, welcome back. Coach Loren Landow is finally on the podcast. I've been trying to get this man on the podcast for a long time. We just haven't had the time to connect. Both of us are extremely busy. If you don't know, I don't know who doesn't know, but if you don't know who Loren is, Loren, can you please explain to listeners, who you are, what you do, and how you got started in the industry?
Sure, I'll try to give the quickest version of the last 24 years.
I know.
In my current role, I'm head strength and conditioning coach of the Denver Broncos, owner of Landow Performance, owner and founder, I guess, of Landow Performance. But I've been in the performance enhancement industry for as I said, 24 years. And it started early on, coming out of school. I was in exercise physiology. I was in cardiac and pulmonary rehab. Yep. And from there, went into kind of the personal training, managerial side of things. And then as the years have gone on, my role has evolved to a little bit more specificity. But, I'm owner and operator of Velocity Sports Performance back in the day. And then I partnered with Steadman Hawkins, where I was the bridge in the sports medicine and sports performance. After that relationship, I opened up Landow Performance, and the rest is history, so to speak.
Yeah, so that's one thing. And you recently got the full-time job now for the Denver Broncos. Can you explain to me, because I'm just being selfish here, I just want to know, but can you explain to me, what was it like when you stepped in as the head strength coach for such an established organization like that?
Yeah, first and foremost, the honor of all honors. I grew up in Denver. I was born and raised a Denver Broncos fan. And then my facilities, I can look out my window right now and see the Broncos location. So for me, it was the best case scenario ever that I could work for the team I grew up loving. I'd say going into the Broncos, it was just like anything, Bill, being business owners like you and I are. You have to come in, you have to learn the culture, you have to kind of get an idea of learning the ropes. I'd say the biggest difference is, here at my facility, the buck stops with me. I make the decisions. I make every decision. And, in the Broncos location, there's a lot of people who are above me. And, I need to run my room just like a business. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of different departments and a lot of different operations that have to happen and coexist. So I would say one of the greatest skill sets that I learned from the private sector going into a team scenario was the ability to have win-win outcomes.
Yeah.
A lot of times strength coaches are, it's my way, it's the highway, my way or it's the highway. And to me, the business world has taught me, like, you've got to be able to think critically.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to make good decisions that aren't about your ego, that are ultimately about the team. And so it was a pretty easy fit for me going in there because I just brought over the same ethos that I had here at Landow Performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think you being a leader and understanding that kind of definitely helped you and gave you a boost, you know, and I know that confidence is there because you've been putting in so much time, experience as a coach for years and years and years. And that's why, like, I think for you, and I'm just going to speak for you. I hope this doesn't like sound bad, but going in there, you probably had more confidence than a new strength coach would, you know what I mean? Taking over a team as like a Denver Broncos, you've been in it, you've worked with such high level athletes, so it probably was a better transition for you as opposed to a kid coming out, you know, of maybe just school or you know, having like a part-time head or I would say assistant coaching job as opposed to what you do, you know?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, I had a couple things that were really working in my favor. The year they won Super Bowl 50, I had a lot of the defensive players who were coming in working with me on the side. So I had some really strong relationships already. And so when I came into the Broncos weight room, I knew so many guys, and so many guys were then telling other teammates about what I could do for them, who I was as a man, and that really made it easy. And then, you know, the two of the assistant coaches who I retained on staff, man, they walked me through the deep waters of the NFL the first year. Like, it's a whole new transition.
Sure.
They helped extremely.
Yeah. Can you explain the difference between like the private sector and now working with the NFL guys? And then also, because you own your own facility and still have a very established facility at that, with a lot of high level guys that come to your gym from other sports too, not just the NFL. We're talking, you got UFC guys in there, you got Major League Baseball players in there. How do you balance that out as a business owner and then also a head guy for a major organization?
Yeah, the number one thing I did when I took the Broncos job, and you've probably seen it, you know, if you followed me at all on social media, I went dark on social media and quit putting things out there because I had to engulf myself 100% in figuring out this life of the NFL and ultimately just the culture and the rhyme and the reason of everything that we do at the Denver Broncos. So first and foremost, what I did is I put 3 people in charge of my business. I have 3 I've got like a 3-headed managerial staff here, and they make all the decisions here now.
Nice.
You know, they only call on me if I have to make a big decision, but honestly, Bill, like a lot of it's out of my hands.
Yeah.
You know, my coaches, I have 30 coaches here, and they take care of the athletes now.
That's awesome.
Every once in a while, if you know, one of our coaches reaches out to me and says, "Coach, we have a short notice fight camp. What do you think?" I'll give them my opinion, kind of like a consultant would. But at the end of the day, these guys are making the decisions on their own. So now fast forward, now get to the back end of that conversation or that question. You know, being at the Broncos, like I'm pretty limited in time when I can work with the guys. So, you know, you have your windows and then you have dark periods in the off season where you can't even work with them. So it's different rules. And sometimes in the off season, I could have had more influence on the guys than I can in season. It's interesting for sure. It's a challenge. But you know, all 32 teams have the same challenge. But you know, I love those types of challenges and figure out how can we do it better than they do.
Yeah. Well, it's a different challenge for other strength coaches because they probably do not have another full functioning gym that they have to look after. And that's good that you have that help there to delegate and to basically automate whatever you need done. That's at the point right now, it's like where I'm building the systems for my own spot, you know, and making sure that I get my coaches the abilities to do things without me having to be over their shoulder all the time. And it just shows that your ability to lead other coaches has helped your business and your overall coaching for your athletes. The performance stands for itself. So I commend you for that, bro.
I appreciate it. I will say this, you know, when I was here full time, so, you know, I'm going into my 4th season with the Broncos. And when I was here full time, like in a weird way, I was probably managing my staff too much. And without me here, they have to make the tough decisions. They have to make their mistakes.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer is you have to make mistakes to truly learn. And I think I put them in a position to make some of those mistakes that aren't costly, but something that they can learn from, and then have that wisdom and that experience that we talk about so much.
Mm-hmm. When you this is interesting because it kind of took me onto this question, because when you bring on a coach to work with your staff, whether it be with the Broncos or whether it be, in your facility, what are you looking at mainly? Like from a spec sheet perspective, like, is there any questions that you're trying to look at? How are they answering it? And then do they have like a period of time where they have to, or like an initiation period where they have to show themselves?
So that's a great question. And I think I look at it similar, but two different ways, between interviewing somebody for the NFL and interviewing somebody for Landow Performance. And my first one, if I'm interviewing somebody for the NFL, so many people are chomping at the bit to get into my organization, get into our organization, and hold on, and try to figure out. They're telling me how, if they work for the Broncos, how much that will help their life.
Yeah.
They're telling me how it would be great to get back in the NFL, how great it would be to XYZ. If you're not telling me how you're going to help me win, and you're going to help the Denver Broncos win, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, I need that person telling me how they're going to help me, not how I'm going to help them.
Yeah.
First and foremost. Now, if they're coming to Landow Performance, we've probably vetted them out through an internship process. Mm-hmm. So in that internship, I've been able to figure out, like, as you're walking into the front doors, are you picking up trash that's on the side of the walkway as you're coming in, and you're just walking right by it?
Mm-hmm. I like
different
that.
Things like that tell me a little bit about your attention to detail, but also, like, what's your character makeup?
Yep.
Are you going to wipe down the countertops when you walk out of the bathroom, or are you going to leave them there for the next person? And so I look at all those little things to tell me who you are. The resume is second or third on the depth chart.
For sure.
I need to see how you act and respond on a daily, and that's where the internship is so valuable.
Yeah. Do you sit there and kind of watch over, how they react or interact, I should say, with other athletes? Because I obviously for me, a big thing is with our guys, and I work with mainly combat sport athletes, is having that optimal ability to communicate with a person or an individual like that. I think that's one of the main things. Is like yes, you should know basics, right? You should know the basic fundamentals of science. You should understand how to train in the weight room. But for the most part, for me, I want to see how they can communicate and get along with my guys,
Yeah, I think that's a big one. Like, first of all, like, what's the energy you're bringing to the room? Mm-hmm. Like, are you an optimistic person? Are you bringing, are you inspiring anybody walking in the door? If I walk in the door, do I feel inspired when I'm watching you coach? Yeah. Those are things I pay attention to. But then I want them to get great relationships with the athletes. But I also know there's a fine line, because at the end of the day, the athletes have to understand, like, this is coach-athlete relationship. We are not friends.
Yes.
We can be friendly, but at the end of the day, I've got to make sure that we establish the fine divider.
For sure.
That this is a coach-athlete relationship, and that's really important. Like, hey, if you want to go golf with people, that's fine. But you know what? Just know the more time you spend with these athletes outside the facility, the more they're going to start to look at this as a friendship versus a coaching relationship.
Very true.
You've got to make a hard line.
Yeah. That's such a good point, man. Because for me, my guys are like older than me, most of them. Very rarely right now will we have guys that are younger. We have some, but we got to make sure that, again, you want to have a relationship with those people, but to a degree of where they still respect you as their coach, as someone that they could come to, and that's a fine line too as well, man. You definitely want to be there for them, but yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's even more so in the private sector than it is with the Broncos and everything else. But so another thing I wanted to ask you was, when you opened up your first facility, right, what were some of the major hurdles or things you had to overcome, right, when you started at your facility? Because I know that you built it up and obviously expanded, but from the beginning, what was the major thing that you say was like hardest thing to get over?
I'd say the biggest thing to get over is the fear.
Yeah.
The fear of, are we going to be able to fill the doors? Are we going to be able to pay our bills? Are we going to be able to do all these things? And it's scary. I think entrepreneurs, it's a scary thing, especially if you're trying to do this on your own, no investors. I think that's something that usually is a barrier that stops people, is the fear. But I'll be honest with you, it sounds crazy, but I'm a big fan of doubling down on myself in those situations. Yeah. And I think not enough people do that in our field. I think they're scared, and they let that scared response inhibit their action. And to me, it's like, if you're scared, I double down. Put yourself in a position where you got to figure, and that's what we've done. We actually just expanded to a bigger location.
Nice.
When COVID first happened in March and we had all these lockdowns, I was doing the math. In 8,000 square feet, with the size of our facility, I was going to have to let coaches go, because if we had the capacity restrictions, they wouldn't have been able to make a living. Yeah. And so I turned to my facility manager and I told her, I said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but we need to go bigger. And she thought I was crazy, but I talked to her about it and why. And I said, we're going to go 13,000 square feet. We need to have more rent. We need to have more space. So if this should ever happen again, narrowing down the capacity numbers, that all the coaches can still work. Yeah. And guess what? November it happened. We moved in October. It happened in November, and we didn't miss a beat. Nice. Financially, sessions-wise, and it worked out really well. So you got to double down. You got to take risks, and you got to bet on yourself.
Yeah, that's a smart move. That's thinking like 15 steps ahead, and that's usually how I like to operate too, But I think you're playing chess, not checkers, and that's really how a leader should be. Like, they should honestly be the general of their army and make sure that everything is put in place so that everybody can achieve what they need to achieve, But
I call it rolling the dice, and if you have the right people in place, it works out. Yeah,
for sure, 100%. So with let's talk a bit about assessments, right? Assessment protocols. What are you using now? I know that you've been in the game forever. You got technology that you can use. But what are your major go-tos from assessing an athlete from a movement perspective, but also a performance perspective? And has things changed over the years since what you've gained in knowledge and experience?
It definitely has changed. I'd say I'll take you through exactly how I look through an assessment and how we do it with our athletes coming in. But first and foremost is, questionnaire. I want to get an idea of what your off-season been like, what your training history been like, what your injury history been like, because, those conversations open up so many things. You get an athlete to deep dive into some of their injury history, and they forgot some of the injuries they've had. Yeah. And so for me, the number one predictor of injury is previous injury. So questionnaire off the bat is critical. After that, doing a hybrid assessment, people will do FMS. I do a version of like the SFMA, but where I take a joint by joint assessment, looking at the foot, the ankle, the knee, and the hip, and taking the hip into different, hip flexion, hip extension patterns, and looking at passive and active ranges of motion. Gotcha. So I do a top-down assessment, and then, we'll also add in, and it's got a scoring scale just like you would in SFMA, but it's not the same. I'll also look at different jump metrics, look at strength deficit, look at RSI scores. Nice. We do have force plates in Landow Performance, so we look at left to right, we look at the RSI scores, we look at the different power outputs and the braking forces. So we're trying to look under the hood a little bit more with the athletes, but also understanding that a lot of those assessments, they get better in time. So you might see a major imbalance the first couple times you do it, but as the athlete starts to learn the skill, they get better at it, just like an FMS. Yeah. We'll also, test with the GymAware. We'll get a nice idea of maybe at different RM values of what their watts output are, lower body, upper body. And then, I'd say as the training goes, we also look at, different, RM factors in the weight room. To me, you're always assessing and you're always testing, if you will. Last part of that, if it's like combine, if they're doing combine prep here at the facility, they're doing the vert, the broad, the shuttles, the L's, and the 40. But what we do is we really profile down into the 40, from the impulse and the acceleration to the drive base to their finish. And so we look at an assessment, but we also really kind of try to slice the onion a little bit further.
Yeah. The one thing that I've been watching from you for such a long time, obviously I've been a big advocate of your coaching for the guys that I coach now, to look into your stuff, because I've probably been watching your stuff since I was 19 years old. So I'm probably aging myself. It's probably 12, 13 years, but you've been doing it for a while. So, but I did want you to speak a little bit about your approach on speed training, right? And how you would throw that into a system for progression. Let's say, for instance, I'll give you a little bit more context. Let's say, for instance, a high school football player looking to go into college. What are your main things that you're going to be working towards to get them to where they need to be for the next level?
You know, it's funny. So say somebody like that is going to a combine where they have to wow people. They have to do certain things that open up eyes. You know, their film's probably done a decent amount, but now they need to have some testing measurables.
Yeah.
Well, to me, the gold standard in most sports, but even like if we look at American football, you know, the power output numbers are critical.
Yeah.
You look at your vertical jump, your broad jump, and your 40 time. Everybody wants to see the power output, but they want to see the speed. So to me, I'm always looking at the vert and the broad, and then, you know, it's funny, I'll look at correlating factors. If somebody has a really good vert and a good broad, but they have a really poor 10-yard or 20-yard time, to me, that's a simple fix. It's technical.
Yeah.
It's technical on their speed development. It's technical on their start. It's technical on the execution of their run. Conversely, if somebody has really good speed, but they don't test really well in their jumps, like that could be an understanding of how to force couple and how to really time those jumps and how to maximize the output on them.
Gotcha.
At the end of the day, Phil, I'm gonna, you know, if I've got if my coaches have a short window of time, like you got to put your bang into the buck of the things that are going to open up eyes, and that's the vert numbers and the broad numbers, and then ultimately the speed.
Gotcha.
Now, you have to start with a foundational layer of technical idea. Technical idea that really brings out rhythm.
Okay.
Rhythm is one of the most critical components to sprinting because it allows you to take full advantage of the storage of elastic energy better. You start to become more efficient at producing force. You know, more force in less time is really the goal, and a lot of that really stems back from being in the right technical models. And also understanding that you can have a technical model, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a complete individual component to it at the same time.
Gotcha. Is there any difference between, like, let's say, I know there is, but I'm just going to ask you this question, but football players working speed training as opposed to, let's say, combat sport athletes like MMA, right?
Yeah, there's a big difference. So to me, and I know you'll laugh at this. Now, you know me, I love the MMA, I love the mixed martial arts game, the combat athletes, but they're not great runners, and it scares the hell out of you watching them sprint.
Yep.
And, you know, there was quite the trend about 5 years ago where a lot of people were putting out, 200-meter sprints for fighters and 400-meter sprints for fighters. And I think that can work, but at the end of the day, they're so far from technical mastery and understanding how to run those races that your risk is so high of hip flexor hamstring pulls that to me, it just seemed like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Yeah. And for me, hey, when I was here working with the combat athletes, we sprinted all the time, 10s, 20s, 30s, and then we do some tempo runs on our curved treadmills. But at the end of the day, like, how can I work on your maximal power output but also reduce risk? Because if you and I pull somebody's hamstring getting ready for a fight in the octagon because we were running 400s and we didn't tell them how to run that race or how to tempo that race, and we just did sprint, like, man, that's a rough one. So
that's real rough.
I saw that as an issue, and I said, look, if you keep these guys to about 30 meters, they're going to keep themselves pretty safe and smart. But at the end of the day, like, they have so many other ways that they can work those energy systems that I don't necessarily need to. No.
And let's go into that a little bit. So what are you working from an energy system standpoint to get them to where they need to be, inside the fight, if you cannot run? Because, a lot of fighters, they're just going to go for road work or they're going to hit their sprints. They don't really understand, like, yes, you can do that with so many different modalities of training. They haven't been exposed to it yet,
I think a lot of it comes down to, what's the camp like? How much of your fitness really comes at your technical sessions? So Phil, you're probably like me. I'd go to the wrestling practices, I'd go to the jiu-jitsu practices, I'd go to the sparring practices, and I'd sport model and I'd watch and say, okay, these guys are getting a lot of quote unquote road work in those sessions because one, they can't maintain the intensity levels for it to be at a further threshold. And so they get a lot of that aerobic foundation at those sessions, especially I found BJJ quite a bit.
For sure.
So what I had to do, Phil, is I had to look at it and say, okay, where are the gaps in their training? And what I found the gaps were here. You can't go as hard in sparring as you can in the fight. You don't want to injure your teammate. You don't want to injure yourself. And at the end of the day, like, a lot of times, a lot of the fighters will avoid the positions that are highly fatiguing in sparring. They'll buddy spar. If they're not a historically good wrestler, they're going to stay away from the ground. They're going to stay away from wrestling because it's so exhausting. So I had to find out where the gaps in training were, and I had to add them into our Wednesday. Our Wednesday becomes our highest metabolic day. And what we do is we kind of, as the camp goes on, that's our lactate power or our lactate capacity day. And for me, I had to sit there and say, we need to work these capacities because they can't do it. They can't ground and pound with heavy elbows in sparring. It's not going to happen. So we build it into some of our metabolic conditioning. We try to make it a little bit more specific to what's going to happen. I see these videos, these guys just dropping elbows. And to me, that's not how it happens effectively. How do you post up? How do you get rotation? And how do you drive down through the trunk and then get that elbow to come through? So to me, it's a lot of it is like not getting sloppy. You'll see that happen in a lot of practices where the guys just throw elbows in a Tabata fashion. It's sloppy. Maximal power output and do it in a metabolic confinement.
Yeah, I mean, so you're looking at it from, these are specific bioenergetic demands, but also biomechanics of the sport too as well. And you're doing that closer to the fight, which is obviously more sports specificity by definition. I know you like to do a lot of like repeat efforts too as well, right? Alactic endurance, you would say, and then also a lot of strength exercises too, which a lot of coaches don't believe in because they think that they're going to either get the fighter slower or be too much neural fatigue, but there's ways to enhance that through a proper progression if you know how to do it from a systemized approach. Can you explain a little bit more like how you go about doing strength training for that athlete, for that combat sport athlete, and what they were lacking when they came to you? Because I've heard of this before. I just want you to reiterate a little bit.
Absolutely. I think some of the big mistakes that people make when they don't work with fighters, but they say, here's how I would program for a fighter, here's how I do this. A lot of them really kind of go back to a block periodization model. And I think to your point, if you do too much accumulation or saturation in a block model, I think that you get a major amount of neural fatigue. And I think what I know ends up happening, and why I came up with the system that I did for our gyms, our fight gyms, is we were seeing how we were inhibiting the technical sessions. They may have done a heavy lift with us when we were thinking we were going to do this block model, and they go to wrestling practice and they were smashed. They were killed. And anytime your sessions were inhibiting technical sessions, at the end of the day, these guys do strength and conditioning or not, that's not always going to be the X factor in the win. At the end of the day, they need to be proficient technically. And if I was getting in the way of that, I had to create a new model. And, we support, Elevation Fight Team here. We support Factory X, Genesis Fight Team. We have some of the top fighters in the world. We just had Kamaru Usman fight, Ian Heinisch who just fought. We had Chris Gutierrez who just fought. I mean, we are doing this with a lot of different fight camps, and I think we found a recipe that works because, one, we're not getting in the way of the technical sessions. We're not just crushing these guys, but we're finding the right gaps, the right times, because we modeled for so long that I think we've stumbled onto something pretty special. But I think most people, so let me go back. So in camp, I do a daily undulated model where, whether it's West Side modeling or whatever, I mean, there's a day where you do more of an alactic and more a day of a dynamic, and then a day of repeat effort. And so for me, that's kind of the goal. And you have to massage it a little bit. I wouldn't say it's exactly like that model, but we try to touch on all those different components within the camp instead of blocking it. I think the block creates too much residual fatigue.
For sure.
Even if you block too much, I think you run into some guys that run into some really challenging times in their weight cut.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's a major issue, especially guys that are in the UFC too as well. A lot of my guys cut substantial amount of weight. So like even at the 4-week out mark is really when the diet actually starts to kick in a lot, and their major focus, unfortunately, sometimes is the weight cut itself. So every day is auto-regulated. Every day is looked at as like, okay, what can we get out of this session, and get them to where they need to be for other sessions. So.
And actually, that's another, that's a great point you bring up. Auto-regulation. We do HRV all the way through camp, and we quit doing HRV about a week out because. We do it a week out because what's it matter at this point? Yeah. And if your fighter wakes up and they're a red 2 days out from the fight, they're going to freak out. So
exactly.
We stop it about a week out anyway, but we know how our periodization models work. But, like guys like Corey Sandhagen, Justin Gaethje, Drew Dober, these guys have really bought into some of those methods that we implement. And, I think everything kind of fits at a certain time. And that's one thing we've found. I think we found a pretty good strategy of how to work through the fight camp week and through the fight camp process. But then we also utilize our technology. But we also know where our technology needs to take a back seat as well.
Yeah, that comes with experience too. Loren, you know what the technology is used for. It's a tool. It's not end all be all. And that's where a lot of coaches go wrong, is like they totally rely on the technology and they don't actually coach. And I think you do need a bit of both, obviously, but at the end of the day, you got to be able to read the athlete too as well. You have to have objective and subjective measures, Yeah.
And Phil, here's a pretty cool thing that I did when I first got into MMA, because I would hear the fighters coming in and just talk, and back in the day, I had the Nate Marquardt, I had Rashad Evans through a couple camps. I had Brendan Shaw, Shane Carwin, and we had some guys who really were pioneers of the sport, and they would just come in and tell me how smashed they were. So I gave them a simple Excel sheet, and it was red, yellow, and green. I had every practice for every day of the week, and I said, do me a favor, take this to your practice. At the end of the practice, I want you to check the box. Was it a red, yellow, or green practice? Red was hard, yellow was moderate, green was easy, technical. Well, I get it at the end of the first week, and of 14 practices in the week, 12 are red. Yeah. And so, I went back to the sport coaches and I said, hey, just so you know, this is how your fighters are perceiving this. And, maybe the jiu-jitsu coach at that time, like Amal Easton, was like, wow, that's weird because, I would have swore that was a green. Yeah. Well, maybe it was a green, but based on where it happened in the week, he was smashed. Yeah. He was smashed. So we started this whole kind of, this whole sport modeling pretty early with this red, yellow, green, this stop sign or this stop signal plan where we looked at red, yellow, and greens. And we just started to educate some of the coaches, and they were all for it.
I like that, actually. I use something similar, more of like an RPE scale, like a 1 to 10. And I know a lot of the weight cut guys do too as well, and they'll dictate what they're eating based off of their intensities of the training. Guys like Lockhart, they'll have like a 1 to 10. If it's a high intensity day, they'll give them more carbohydrates and so on and so forth. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, I think if you connect it all together with the skills coach, weight cut nutrition guy, and then the strength and conditioning coach, there's lines of communication, and this, Lorens, like always having lines of communication open with all the coaches is vital, and that's in any sport really. I mean, you're looking at with the NFL, also you're probably all the time with the head guy, with the head coach, and then everybody else in that same sense is like athletic trainer, position coach, everything else. I think that's one thing that a lot of people miss, especially young coaches. They just think that what they do is all that matters in a sense. They may not say that, but honestly, their actions speak louder than words,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We see that all the time, these young coaches, or there's plenty of people out there who are programming for MMA athletes, and you're like, there's no way you work with an MMA athlete if you're putting that much volume, that much workload, those types of exercises. Like, I'd be shocked if you really worked with this population. Yeah. But at the end of the day, experience is the greatest teacher. that I know you have found and that I have found? Like, how many times have you taken a guy through a camp? You're like, oh God.
Yeah.
Like, or you look back historically and say, what was I thinking back then?
No, I've done it myself. Like in my own training camps, I'm like, I really just messed myself up in that one. I don't know what I was doing. You know what though? I don't know who said this to me, Loren, but it was a smart person that was saying this to me. We were talking, and I say intelligent because he got me. He understood me. But we were saying, it was like, it's a good thing when we were competing, we didn't know as much as we know now, because everything would be either contradicted or like you would overanalyze so much, you know. But you need it as a coach, I guess.
And I think at the end of the day, that's where some of the technology comes into a problem in MMA, because at the end of the day, like, this is a sport of finishing people. And this is a sport of combat. And you've got to be able to go to some dark places to be able to do that. And I think if it's too much technical, it becomes a problem. So, or too much on the technology, you've got to understand, like, this is one-on-one combat, and you've got to be able to go to some dark places and go to different things. You go to some of those different levels. The other thing I'll tell you too, you brought up a key point, and I said, God, there was something you said there, and it just jogged my memory. Oh, when people go back and they look at their fight modeling, and you and I were saying how you look back at some of the things you used to do, and like, what was I thinking? Too many people get caught up in wins and losses being their indicator if they had a good camp or if they did the right things.
True.
And I try to tell my coaches at LP when I was leaving here, I was like, don't let the wins and losses blind you or give you a bias that you did the right thing. Because some of the best training camps and some of the best the fighters have ever felt, they got caught. They got caught. So you've got to sit there and say, you have to ask all the right questions and pay attention on the front end to the fight. But even after the fight, you've got to do a good, healthy debrief with the athlete and say, how did you feel the morning you woke up? How did you feel during your shakeout? How did you feel, before you walked? How did you feel in the rounds? How did you feel you recovered in between rounds? You have to ask those hard questions, because there's a couple things I believe in, Phil. I believe in this. I believe in paying attention to your wins and losses, but really paying attention. Did you win by a unanimous decision? Were you able to push the gas pedal late in the round? Were you able to win a split decision in that last round? Like, those are the things that tell me a lot more about what your physical preparation were like than a knockout in the first round. Like, were you able to weather the storm? And that's why I've been impressed, because I watch your fighters, and we've had some battles head to head, and I'm really impressed with what your guys do. So I think you're on some great things down there.
Oh man, that's an honor hearing it from you, man. I appreciate that. Let's talk about last weekend, Saturday. Kamaru Usman. I know he worked with you guys. Looked awesome, amazing. Guys, honestly, he's going to be upon that line of legendary status. What did you take out of that fight, and what was your preparation like with Kamaru?
It's funny. Aaron Porter, who's one of our coaches here at LP, he did all his preparation. Nice. And so it wouldn't be fair for me to speak about what Aaron did. But first and foremost, Kamaru is a special athlete. We've seen him fight for a long time, and he's done those things time and time again. I think what we did, I think Coach Peacock has done a great job with him over his course of his career, and we're just fortunate that he's training here. I will say, you asked me what I took away from that fight. Like, Gilbert Burns is a monster. But I'll tell you, probably the most exceptional. Let me wait for this phone.
It's all good, man.
They gotta pick this damn thing up.
Where the guys at, man?
Come on,
coaches.
Oh, there we go. You asked me what I picked up from watching that fight, and I will say, quite impressively, maybe the most brilliant aspect of coaching I've ever seen was Trevor Whitman.
Yeah, man.
After the first round, he said, "You're a champion because of your jab."
Yep.
Most coaches would have been in that corner saying, "You got to throw the jab. How come you're not throwing the jab? You got to throw the jab more."
Yeah, man.
Trevor said two things, and he made you think champion in jab.
Yeah.
That's it. Masterful coaching. End of story.
Man.
I got goosebumps talking about it right now, because when I saw that, when I heard it, I've cornered with Trevor millions of times, and Trevor is exceptional. When I heard that, it reiterated to me why he's one of the best in the game.
Yeah, Trevor is definitely one of the best, if not, I want to say the best when it comes down to getting a fighter in that mental space. I've gotten the pleasure to talk to Trevor a couple of times. Great guy, but a phenomenal coach, man. Like, phenomenal coach, super underrated in my opinion. I think he'll go down as one of the greatest. With that being said, you said you cornered a couple of guys. Interested to know, like, what were your major contributions inside the fight itself? I know when we're talking about recovery and we're talking about, breathing and then being there as more of a security in a sense, because as a strength and conditioning coach, we know that we get those guys deep into those waters, man, when we have control of the environment and put them through some stuff. And do you do any of that, or is this something that you tell them or anything?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate. I've probably cornered probably over 100 fights.
Wow.
And I cornered at all levels. I can, the amateur, levels here in Denver to, I've been fortunate to corner title fights and corner things in the UFC. And so I've been fortunate. So I think, to your point, I think that athletes like a coach around who they trust, first and foremost, who makes them feel calm in the heat of the moment. Because at the end of the day, all these fighters, I don't care who you are, I think I can tell you 2 fighters off the top of my head who I've worked with my whole career, who I never saw them really go through that high undulation of spike, and who actually just loved fighting in that day before. Usually the day before, all fighters are like, why do I do this?
Yep. Yeah. It's very true, man. It's so true.
I think at the end of the day, they like people that they know can get them to that place.
Yeah.
But, for me, like, I'm the guy who's looking at the whether we're in the blue or the red corner, and I'm sitting there saying, okay, we need to warm up at this time. Once this fight happens, we need to warm up here. This fight's 2 heavyweight guys. It's not going to go the distance. We got a plan to go. I'm kind of working the back engineering of when we need to start the warm up.
Gotcha.
That's probably first and foremost. I'd say next, what I do is, we're in the corner and I work the clock. And working the clock is important because I think you let those coaches coach.
Sure.
And then, hey, we're at the halfway point.
Yep.
Hey, I think there's pivotal times in the fight. I think there's 2.5 minutes. I think there's 90 seconds. I think there's 60 seconds. I think those are very pivotal times to really tell the fighter what's going on.
Yeah.
And so, and when I do that in our training, or I used to when I was here, I'd always really talk about 2.5, 90, and 60. I think those are big mental reminders. And so I would do that in the corner. And at the end of the day, I don't give too much advice. I know my role, but that's the biggest contribution.
Yeah, that's funny because I'm the same way, man. It's like I've fought before and I trained for 12 years. I still train now, but yeah, just letting those guys from the technical side take that. And then you contribute the way you need to contribute from a physicality standpoint, from a mental standpoint. What is your what's your warm up look like in the locker room?
It's funny. So we typically will start our warm up about 40 minutes out. Okay, and it's a progression in warm up, but it starts with all my stuff.
Yeah.
Ground series, hip activation. I think it's like anything. Slow. Single joint, multi-joint, and then more dynamic movements, and then we get to the real deal, like where you go through modified rounds, if you will, working on some strike and working on some grappling, wherever you think the fight might go. But at the end of the day, we always start with my stuff because all of a sudden a fight goes longer than you expected, or there's an intermission, or something happens that slows it down. Then we just go back to my stuff. Because my stuff is low cost energy-wise, but we can bring you back down and not say, well, shit, now we got to sit around. You don't do that. Yeah. You don't want to plant that seed into the athlete's head. Say, hey, come on over here. Let's go through some back rockers. Let's go through this. And just trying to keep the athlete warm, but not too much of a sweat if you're being prolonged. So one, it goes from very general to extremely specific, and it goes from low intensity to higher intensity. But we need to make sure that we pull off in enough time to bring the engine down before we go for our walk.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's usually how mine would look, and keeping it really general movements, activation, tissue temperature, all that.
And you and I know, like in the UFC, you have a pretty good sense when you're going to walk.
Yeah. You
have a pretty good sense. Some of these other shows locally, you don't always know when you're going to walk. So it's really, you got to be smart in how you get things going. And Phil, I have it down to an exact science. My warm up on fight night takes 8 minutes.
Nice.
So I can sit there and tell, whoever the coach was, whether it was, Mark Montoya, Trevor Whitman, whoever, Jake Ramos, whoever it is, I can sit there and say, hey, I'm going to start mine. All right, I got 1 minute left. And, at the end of the day, like, I believe there's 3 types of coaches that I've seen. When I really look at like coaching and really the great ones, and there's a coach at different times, right? There's a coach who can take somebody from the lowest ranks and get them to elite level, right? That's the growth and development. I also think that there's game day coaches who are exceptional, right? We talked about the Trevor Whitmans and the Mark Montoyas, and then there's game day coaches in the heat of battle that know how to do or say the right thing at the right time. You watch a lot of fights and you hear somebody, oh, you know what, it's split right now. You're like, no, you're down 2.
Yeah.
You're down 2 rounds. You got to finish this dude.
Yeah.
And when coaches are real and they can hit that chord with the athlete and say, no, you got to finish him to get this win. And I believe that there's that third coach who is that guy. So there's a development guy, there's a day of the fight, and then there's the in-between round guy. Yeah. And they're not always the same person.
Yeah, I feel like you need all 3 in the corner. As a fighter, when I picked my corner, like I had all 3 of those guys that you just explained. It's crazy.
You probably didn't know why you had them. They just happened to be those roles.
Yeah. I'd make sure, even if the guy really wasn't gonna yell out any technical advice, was more of like someone that I knew that I was comfortable with.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be super technical. It just, as long as I know what I'm doing as far as a game plan perspective, where I have my head coach that is going to carry out the game plan, tell me what I need to do, what I'm not doing, or what he's seeing. And then I have the other guy being like, how you doing? You having fun?
Well, and somebody to tell you to take a breath and have fun. I will tell you one of the coolest things I ever saw too was I was cornering a Neil Magny fight with Leister Bowling, who was at that time, he was the head coach at Elevation.
Yeah.
And I remember it was after the second round, and I remember Neil's opponent kind of was crawling back to his stool. And I remember Leister stopped Neil and said, turn around, look at your opponent right now. Yeah. Look at him. You need to break him. You need to finish him in the third. Yeah. Because it was a split. It was split at that fight. At that point in the fight, it was 1-1, first and second round. And Leister said, "You need to finish him." And he was smart in the moment to be able to pick up on that. Yeah. I think some of the most brilliant coaching I've ever seen in my life is in the MMA game.
Yeah, it's so mental. A lot of it, man. It's like 90%. In if you want to put a percentage on it, I feel like. At the end of the day, with the indicators that we use based off of what we put in as a physical preparation or a strength and conditioning coach, at the end of it all, it comes down to, one, are you mentally prepared for the stresses that are going to be put upon you inside that cage door when it closes, or when you step into the ring, or when you step on a football field or a basketball court? Like, are you capable of withstanding that stress and those demands? Just from an intensity standpoint, there's so many things riding on that line. And again, with an individualized sport like the combat sports, it's all on you at the end of the day. And when I stepped in the cage, I felt that. Like, I was like, all right, I did everything I needed to do to prepare. Now it's my time to showcase what my coaches and myself has put together in this last 8 weeks or so,
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
absolutely.
So, what I did want to do was ask you, what's next? What are we doing now?
At the end of the day, it's whatever I can to put the Denver Broncos in the best position to get to the field, be on the field, stay on the field, and win games. Yeah. First and foremost. My facility. Everybody always says, "Oh, do you have a vision board? Do you set out goals? Do you do this?" I'm like, no. To me, things just happen. Okay. If you work hard enough, the right steps kind of happen. They take care of themselves. Right now, my facility, it's in a place where my people are running it. They're doing all the day-to-day, and I've got to be laser-focused with what I do with the Denver Broncos. For sure. And that's why you don't see me doing podcasts, and you don't see me doing different things, because, I've and for you, I've got to do it, Bill. You're my guy.
I appreciate it, man.
So for me, like, I owe it to the Denver Broncos, I owe it to my players to give them every ounce of me. Now, the thing I love about the fight game, it's just like everything. Every fighter wants to be a football player, and every football player wants to be a fighter.
That's so true.
It's so true. And so I had my Bronco players, I set it up where they could come over here and meet Justin Gaethje. Yeah. And they're like freaking out. Yeah, man. These fanboys, and some of our guys like Kareem Jackson is a huge Kamaru Usman fan.
Yeah.
Like, it's so cool to be able to blend it, because at the end of the day, I'm going to go back to this point, Phil. If I know that fighters have performance anxiety or fear of combat, but it's not fear of getting hurt.
Yeah.
It's the fear of losing. It's the fear of not being as good. And if fighters have that, the most alpha dudes on the planet, then I know every other athlete has the same issues.
For sure.
So to me, I believe like that whole performance anxiety, performance, we want to call it, whatever we want to call that psychology piece, the sooner you sit there and go, I have, that built-in apprehension or fear, the sooner you actually deal with it, the better.
Yeah.
The better. It's like, you come out and you deal with it, or you sit there and you have your strategies to work around it. But what MMA has taught me is if those guys have it, everybody has it.
Yeah.
And so don't shy away from it. Don't hide from it. Sit there and hit it head on and do all those things. Make sure your preparation is good enough from a physical standpoint, a nutritional standpoint. But also understand, like, I'm going to get beat. I'm going to get beat. But I'm also going to get right back up, and I'm going to fucking beat you.
No, for sure.
I can cuss on this thing.
Man, come on now. This is my podcast.
It's Phil Daru.
Of course you can we can say this all day long.
There we go.
All right, so last thing, where can they find you? Anybody who's wanting to listen, want to listen more? I know you have a ton of articles and things like that online, so just go ahead.
I don't put out a ton of stuff anymore, but if you still, every once in a while I might hit retweet on something. Like I said, I'm trying to be blinders with the Broncos and not really develop content or anything like that. But follow me on social media, either Twitter or Instagram at Loren Landow. But those are probably the best places. But Landow Performance, my coaches are putting out some great stuff every so often. A lot of times we use our social media just to highlight our athletes. But we drip some information here and there as well.
Nice, man. All right, Loren, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Hey.
All right, we'll catch up soon, all right?
All right, brother. I appreciate you. You keep up all the great work, Phil.
All right.